Good evening. My name is Ajit Sachdeva, and I'm the Senior Vice President of the Academy for Master Surgeon Educators. And I'd like to welcome everyone to this very special fireside chat. As you know, the person who's going to be chatting with us is Dr. Scott Levin from the University of Pennsylvania. He will be introduced formally by Dr. Shabahang in a few minutes. But I just want to add a few personal comments in regard to Dr. Levin and my interactions with him and my getting to know him. I met Dr. Levin when he joined the Board of Regents of the college several years ago. And right away, I was impressed by his presence, his intellect, his drive, and his leadership. They were all very visible to me right from day one. And we interacted regularly during the Regental meetings. And then in October of 2014, when I presented the proposal for this academy and the concept of the academy to the regents, Dr. Levin was sitting right there towards the front of the room, and he was the first person to get ready to come to the mic. And when he spoke, he really spoke strongly in favor of this academy getting established. And I was so grateful for his opening comments. And with that, other regions followed, and the proposal was accepted unanimously and very enthusiastically by the regents, and the rest is history. Dr. Levin joined the steering committee of the academy. I invited him along with Dr. Britt. We both invited Dr. Levin to join the steering committee. And in that role, Dr. Levin worked with Dr. Britt and I, both of us co-chaired the steering committee to create the model for the academy with the rest of the steering committee members. And he has been an active contributor to that steering committee ever since, and a founding member of the academy. He has had an illustrious career, which we'll hear about and get to know him better over the course of the hour ahead. And Dr. Shabahang, who has led these fireside chats and the virtual grand rounds with such great skill, is again going to be the moderator. And he has immense skill in bringing out the accomplishments of the people on the other side of the fireside chat, and also bringing out their personal qualities and their leadership qualities that really right into the core of these individuals who we invite to be our fireside chat folk to share their stories. So with that, let me thank the staff for making all the arrangements. Dr. Patrice Blair, who is the Associate Vice President of the Division of Education, has been involved with the Academy from day one. Kate Kimmick, who's the manager of our Academy. Caroline Roth-Forker, who is the administrator. And I will now turn it over to Dr. Shabahang, who is an illustrious member of our Academy, and as I mentioned before, a great moderator for these sessions. So Mo, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sachdeva. I appreciate it. And Dr. Levin, thank you so much. Let me just start with some housekeeping. As you can see on the screen, obviously, please put any questions that you have in the chat. We're going to try to blend those in, and then we can go on to the next slide. You can see all the other people that we've interviewed, and these interviews are all on the website of the Academy. We welcome you to listen to them. We were just talking with Dr. Levin, who had actually listened to a couple of these yesterday, about how valuable these are. Next slide, some of the upcoming events. We're really excited to have our panel together again. For those of you who watched this, I believe it was in November, we have an illustrious panel talking about global surgical education on March the 5th. This is part 2. We're going to have Dr. Kyla Terhune, the Senior Vice President for Education at the American College of Surgeons, as our panelist for April the 16th. And we'll have announcements about May the 28th and June the 25th. Thank you for sharing that. So it's my honor and pleasure to introduce Dr. Scott Levin. Dr. Scott Levin is the Vice President and Associate Dean for Resource Development, the Paul Magnuson Professor of Bone and Joint Surgery, Chair Emeritus, Department of Orthopedic Surgery, Professor of Plastic Surgery at the Perelman School of Medicine, University of Pennsylvania. Scott, it is an absolute honor, and I enjoyed our preparation, and thank you for your dedication. We had to get Scott, I think it was somewhere out south of Barcelona when we spoke to each other last week. So thank you so much.
Pleasure.
As always, would love to go through the story of your life and your journey, and maybe starting chronologically as far as your education. And I would love to have the pearls that you've gathered through the years in each stage. But let's start with your undergraduate education and your medical education and residencies.
Sure. Well, Mo, first of all, to you and Dr. Sachdeeva and the ACS staff, thank you for the privilege of speaking with me tonight. And I hope we have a dialogue that can have impact to those listening and hopefully sometime in the future. But directly answering the question about my education, born and raised in Philadelphia, my dad was a naval career officer. My mom was a stay-at-home mom who raised myself and my brother and my sister. I went to public high school, and then my dad wanted me to stay close to Philadelphia. And I literally snuck out of the house with a friend of mine, and we drove to Duke University for interviews. He wound up going to Princeton and became a lawyer, and I wound up going to Duke and did my undergraduate school at Duke University. I put myself through college and worked as an orderly, wheeling patients around Duke Hospital, mop floors in the emergency room. I was so interested in medicine. That was a plum job at the time. And actually, it's very interesting. My first attempt, I didn't get into medical school. I, had a good grades, good boards, but not probably at the level that was required. So at the end of the day, I spent a year as a biomedical engineer in grad school, as a PhD pathway. I said, that's not for me. And actually, I pivoted. I went to the British West Indies for 2 years to an offshore medical school, did great there, transferred to Temple University, got my MD from Temple, and then went back to Duke in 1982 for 2 years of general and thoracic surgery with Davis Aveston, then 4 years of orthopedics, then a hand fellowship, and 3 years of plastic surgery. So that was my educational pathway. I became double boarded, and as you may know, I hold a certificate of added qualification in hand surgery, and I've never looked back. I've been in academic surgery. I spent 29 years at Duke, and then 17 years ago came here to the University of Pennsylvania. I went from being division chief in the Department of Surgery to the department chair of orthopedics here at Penn.
Mm-hmm.
And I've loved every minute of my training, my education. The journey has been remarkable. I'm proud of the people I've interfaced with, those I've been able to train, and some small contributions along the way that I've been able to make, inspired by residents and fellows and fellow faculty and our surgical friends from around the world.
I appreciate that. And I want to just maybe go back to one point that you brought up. And obviously the concept of adversity is such an important concept. And I'm kind of assuming not getting into medical school was maybe a major adversity at that time. And it's so amazing to look at your CV and see what has come. And meanwhile, obviously, there are many who don't get into medical school and try alternative pathways. I just wanted to emphasize that. And just what did you take from that? What was your thinking at the time? And what did that conjure in your thinking as when it came to the future?
Well, it was a shock, as you can imagine. We don't have to spend the entire hour, but it was humbling, Mo. And every person I've interfaced with who I believe has been successful in life, in teachers I've met, phenomenal surgeons and surgical leaders I've met, the concept of humility is really important. And so I never took anything for granted. I was hungry to become a doctor. My grandfather was on the battlefields of World War One. He was an otolaryngologist. I never met him. My mother's father. And sort of in the back of my mind, the grandfather I never met, but that I had, was sort of cheering me on and said, you know, pick yourself up, pal. And if this is what you want to do, you'll find a way to do it. And of course I did. It was a sort of a big pill to swallow. But the first day in anatomic dissection, I'll never forget it, Mo. I knew I was doing the right thing. And at that time, this was 1980, you know, you could take a transfer board and exam. And if you had good enough scores and there were slots, one could matriculate in an American school. And I transferred. But let me come back to center to answer your question. It was probably the best lesson that I ever had. And, you know, it's interesting. I counsel a lot of medical students, high school students. You can say maybe I look at those that didn't get in. For example, sometimes residents will come to me and they're all distraught. You know, I applied to 10 fellowships and my first choice was X, but I got my second choice. And I said, let me tell you something. Okay, you went to an American medical school, you have an MD, you've just completed your core orthopedic or plastic surgery training. How you apply yourself, how you work, how you take advantage of whatever environment it is, it's going to define you. Now, granted, certain institutions, certain fellowships, certain hospital environments have more amenities or opportunities than others sometimes. But it's up to the individual. That's what I believe. And so I don't feel sorry for somebody who says, you know, I got into med school, but it wasn't my first choice. Then I tell my story. And I don't say it to ingratiate them or make them feel bad, but it's a life lesson that all of us have seen people come from adverse circumstances. You know, we have a lot of first generation medical students or residents, right? The United States is a melting pot. This is not a political statement. But when I see somebody that was a refugee, or I've had residents that I've taken into my residency that were homeless for a while, or had to cross the border and they worked as a car mechanic before they got a scholarship to an Ivy League institution. I sort of have a soft spot in my heart for those that are not, you know, first tier, let's say, but have tremendous potential. And I've worked very hard. This is in my past, but I've never forgotten sort of what it took to get into med school and how privileged all of us are to do what we do, regardless of the pathway. We are blessed. We are privileged. And that's been borne out since day one.
I'm so appreciative for allowing me to go into that, because that was something that stood out to me. And I really feel like what you've just said is worth a ton. And so thank you for that.
Sure.
When we were talking, you mentioned the 2 years of general surgery, and obviously the path to orthopedic surgery and to plastic surgery is very different today than it was. And you treasured those 2 years of general surgery, something that your residents today are not getting to do. I just wanted to get your perspective on that and your thoughts on that.
Well, it's very interesting. As I mentioned, Dr. Savastin was my mentor and had just an incredible influence on my life, my career, my understanding of academic medicine. My Duke days were exceptional. And, for the young people listening, yes, you know this well because your hairstyle is like mine. We've been around for a while. It was there was no 80-hour week. Libby Zion came later. Duty hour restrictions are what they are today. We could debate that, but we won't. But the intense training, the attention to detail, we would round like you did. We'd round, finish rounding, we'd round again, we'd pre-round, whatever it is. We learned how to take care of patients. And those 2 years, I was doing open Coker approaches for cholecystectomy. Lap choles hadn't come along. I was being taught how to fix hernias. I helped in thoracotomies. My greatest joy, Mo, and I remember this to this day, when we were on cardiothoracic surgery, we'd be up all night, sometimes taking care of sick patients. We'd be on the wards, but the reward the next morning was you got to go to the OR. And we got to take saphenous vein. We were taught as interns how to rip vein. Okay. I just did a couple hours ago a vein graft for a free flap that went down. And, some of the residents and even senior fellows, I said, do you know how to take a vein graft? Some do, some don't. Here's my point. Those 2 years of general and thoracic surgery, that intense training, the environment I was in, set the stage for a commitment to excellence. We were taught a commitment to excellence, continuity of care. There was no shift work. And I know to the listeners, Moshe Abahang, I'm feeling biased and bring back the good old days. It was intense. We were hardworking, but the value of that, at least for Scott Levin, gave me life lessons that really have stood the test of time and have been very, very helpful. I'll give you one anecdote example. Everybody has quality conference. I mean, I still call it M&M, but we're not supposed to call it that anymore, I guess. And I've been as a chair in orthopedics when we've had patients say that have had a spine surgery or hip surgery, 80 years old, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, whatever it is. And let's just say the morbidity was the patient went to the unit or the mortality occurred. And I would say in conference, and I can hear myself, well, did anybody ask to have a CVP line put in or a Swan-Ganz catheter? Or what was the cardiac output? I learned all this as an intern and junior resident. Those are concepts that, at least in specialty training, right? They're gone. They're lost.
Yeah.
And you can say, well, Scott, you're an old timer. There are intensivists now. There are people in the ICU. But I was asking the question to the residents, to the fellows, even the junior faculty. Are they familiar with, taking care of their own patients in the ICU? And granted, times have changed. Thank goodness we have our surgical critical care doctors in the unit. You and I go to the OR, we can't be there looking at fluids when we're doing a long case. I get that. But at least learning how to speak the language and know the questions to ask, I think we've lost some of that. That's the point about my commentary during the orthopedic grand rounds when I was chair.
And I just want to say, please feel free to put your questions in the question and answer, and we're going to get to it. So I see one hand up. So please feel free to type it into the questions. Let me ask, though, if, obviously, a lot of times someone may listen to this and say, well, we can't go back to that. And we all understand that.
Yeah.
What would your advice be to the next generation as far as what good things can be kept from the way it was done as we've already gone into this new age of specialization and so on? Anything that you think within our educational parameters we can still keep?
I'll tell you one factor that has bothered me. Our medical students, in order to, quote, get the residents they want, let's just argue, do 3 or 4 or 5 sometimes, quote, away rotations in specialties. They'll go to 5 different general surgery programs or 5 neurosurgery programs as the visiting student. They're going to be doing neurosurgery or gynecology or minimally invasive visceral surgery the rest of their life. The advice I give the students, they don't take it, is do cardiology, do pulmonology, do medical intensive care units, right? Become good doctors. Don't become a specialist in medical school. And I think that's a place to start because, you can very quickly, right, differentiate. We don't call them interns anymore, but the PGY1 residents who come that have been in the ICU, that can go to the bedside, you can see somebody in acute congestive heart failure or having an MI or in hypoglycemic shock, whatever the general medical things, right, Mo, that all doctors and certainly have, they know all about having to do a total knee, but they're not going to be putting in a total knee or doing a Whipple the first day of their internship. They're going to be taking care of sick patients, and the concept of graduated responsibility, I think, permeates and should permeate all surgery. You don't take your PGY1s and say, here's the knife and do a redo bowel resection. So
Right.
I think in terms of answering your question, more broad-based medicine in medical school. And then, as I said, I do think this curtailed, broad principled general surgery exposure, at least in orthopedics, is shortened. Plastic surgery, somewhat, they're the integrated programs of 3 preliminary years, but the residents are doing a lot of plastic surgery. That's fine. But I still think we have to assure, and I think at some point I learned from Satch that Canadian system, they're either a preliminary exam or certain requirements that you have to demonstrate. Maybe it was the British system before you could go on to your specialty. I think a core curriculum is still important for PGY1, PGY2. That's my opinion.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for going into the areas of a little bit of controversy. As you mentioned, you were at Duke for many years, and then you transitioned to University of Pennsylvania. When you were a young attending, obviously you've published extensively, you've spoken throughout the world. What was your ambition at that time? Where did leadership come in your plans early in your career?
Well, I had an interesting opportunity to lead a division early, probably too early. So I'll give you the pros and cons. My first goal was to be a well-respected, established clinician, to build a practice. My heroes were capable surgeons, and they were triple or quadruple threat people. They, were passionate about educating. They had research, whether grants or reviews or whatever. They various percentages of their time were in education and research. But all of my role models were exemplary surgeons. I think that's why we go into surgery, to care for patients. So I was very keen to establish that. But my role models, starting when I was an undergraduate, working with the pioneers in replantation, I'll mention Jim Urbanek, who's a member of the college, who was the chairman of orthopedics when I went through, and J. Leonard Goldner. These are just names, but very influential people, in addition to Dr. Sabiston, and people like Will Seeley was around when I was an undergraduate, the heart surgeon, and a lot of very prominent people in Duke surgery. They were all excellent clinicians. So that's what I wanted to establish first. And I really established very quickly a very active practice, sadly, because a plastic surgeon by the name of William J. Barwick, who taught me plastic surgery. He was beloved. He did his general surgery in Georgia. He died in a single car accident about 7 months after I started my attendingship. He died in the spring of 1992. So I automatically had to take over his practice in microvascular surgery and mine. So I was very clinically busy. And then some other events occurred at Duke where there was a transition in leadership in plastic surgery. And Bob Anderson had come and replaced Dave Sabiston at the time. This is 1995. And he called me into his office one day, the new chair of surgery, Bob Anderson, and I thought, oh, who did I upset today? And it wasn't that at all. He said, look, we're going in a different direction. We'd like you to be the acting chief of plastic surgery. Well, I had been in practice, Mo, about 4 years, but had established a very busy clinical practice. And I said, okay, I'll take this on while you do a search. I had no intention of being division chief for 14 years. And they did a big national and international search. And Bob called me into the office one Saturday morning, and he said, we want you to interview for the job. And I said, well, I'm very flattered. And they had all the famous names that had come through. And I said, okay, I'll interview. And Monday morning, an email went out from Bob. Dr. Levin has accepted the chief of plastic surgery position at Duke. So no negotiation. I got some bookshelves for the residents, and that was about it. And I was an assistant professor at the time. So I had to
Oh,
climb the academic ladder. I didn't say, Bob, I'll take the job, but you have to make me a professor. So I came up through the ranks and assistant, associate with tenure and full professor and so forth. So the answer to your question is I was put in a leadership position pretty early in my career. Now, granted, I had done 9 years of training and, was on the faculty and very busy, and I was known in the institution. And there was a search, and that's how I started early in leadership.
and what would you say? Obviously, there are some who are listening who, may have had opportunities early in their career. Um, what were the pros and the cons? I mean, obviously, that because at 4 years into being an attending at pretty early stage.
I think it's a great question. First of all, I'd advise against it. It worked for me, but not without, great sacrifice in terms of my family life. A lot
Hmm.
of the speakers and firesides and anybody who succeeds, Mo, you know this, has great achievements, but there are some prices to pay. And, I'm not playing a violin or sad about it, but I didn't see my children that much. I was taking a lot of call in trauma, in microvascular surgery and hand surgery. Tremendous growth personally and surgically and professionally, but some parts were left behind in terms of, the so-called work-life balance. That is
Hmm.
important. How could I say it's not important? We know this. But I nevertheless soldiered on, if you will. But the answer to your question is I still, as I told you and the audience, had to build my academic career. I had to do my research. I was involved in national organizations, which is what people sometimes do in academia. And something has to give. Something has to give. And particularly when you take a lot of call. So let's be honest. There are people now that when they approach me and say, "Oh, I have this opportunity to be a chief or a chair," I say, "Hold your horses. Just wait. Is your research where you want it to be? How old
Mm.
are your children? How much time do you spend with your family, with your partner, your wife, your husband, so forth and so on?" And I think that if I had to do over again, somebody should have put a governor on me and said, "Not now." But the institution had a need. Bob Anderson, the late Bob Anderson, was a great guy. The division, my colleagues, my friends, the residents needed a leader. And like I said, I was the acting chief for 6 months. It's like giving a 16-year-old a new Ferrari. He said, "You can drive it, but in 6 months you have to give the keys back." Well, I kept the keys
Exactly.
and to the car. And I would say, and I have this discussion not infrequently with people looking at career opportunities much later than the age of 40, you know, it's like buses. An opportunity will come along. This isn't the only job you're going to be offered if you have credentials and you're interested in leading and so forth. But quote, is this the right job? Is this the right time? Will you be afforded by the institution or the department the right resources to succeed? And
Mm.
that's a big question, right? When people look at
Absolutely.
opportunities.
It's such an interesting concept because I just want to highlight what you said is the possi we're in a world where we move from one thing to another because we're told we ought to take that.
Right.
And what you're saying is really, I just want to highlight it because it's a fascinating concept. As you think of yourself as the young leader of that division, and then the more mature leader who came to University of Pennsylvania, what what was different about your leadership?
Um, I think one who leads should always lead by example. It's not the question you asked me, but there's certain things that are consistent. You have to be out in front. I think a surgical leader has to be, he, she, or they have to be a surgeon. They have to be seen in the operating room by their peers, by the nurses, by the other individuals in surgery in the institution. You have to be a credible clinician, and you have to demonstrate that in the operating room and in the clinics. What changed? I was drinking from a fire hose when I was a young division chief. And the scale, Mo, what's the difference, you asked? The scale is I had 7 or 8 people I was responsible for. We built it up to about 10. Relatively, in those times, in the in the 90s, early 2000s, a division of 8 to 10 or 11 plastic surgeons in a division, that was a formidable group.
Yeah.
Now there's some departments of plastic surgery that have 20 and 30 individuals. So as some of the divisions of plastic surgery have gone to departments, obviously their number of faculty research enterprises are larger. So I had 10 people. When I came to Penn, I built a department of 65 orthopedic surgeons, starting with 20. Okay. And over 15 years, we grew because of clinical need and market share and all the other business issues that helps a department grow. So the scale was larger. And I was at Duke as a division chief. I was the chief cook and bottle washer. And I was the program director and the chief and the individual who's doing a lot of surgery and mentoring and so forth. Obviously, good leaders learn how to delegate. And when I came to Penn, I had a major department. I had 120 people in the lab. Now we have probably 180 or 200 in the lab with, a huge NIH portfolio and so forth. So I think the answer to your question is I went from more of a active manager trying to lead to the equivalent of a CEO of a big organization where the big picture, the vision, coaching, building up faculty, building the divisions became my priority. So it was scale. It was scale. And along those lines, what I encourage, for example, in a department, division leaders to do, I said this to another division leader at Penn Surgery a couple months ago. I said, I want you to grow so big that you look like a department. You're a division, but that's sort of the currency. That's what I tried to do as a department chair. We have 6 people that do joint replacement. Well, my vision for the next 5 years is I want 12. Not just numbers, but the need for more people indicates you're doing a good job clinically. You have material that you can translate into research. You can attract more fellows and so forth.
Was there anything, and then we'll let go of the leadership piece for now, but was there anything that you had learned from your first episode of leadership that you're like, I'm going to change or modify this and I'm going to be a different leader? Was there any impactful lesson?
What I started to do, Mo, in transition, and this was 2009, I started to read books on leadership. And one of the books that is sort of my Bible that many people know is the Stanford business professor's book, Jim Collins's Good to Great. And he talks about the level 1 leader, the level 5 leader. I'm sure you know about this. Yes. And the level 1 leader is Scott Levin, doing every case he can, being there day and night. I'm not a hero, but, just overwhelming the clinical enterprise. Never saying no, I'll take it on, so forth and so on. That's a level 1. Yeah, you're a good surgeon, Levin, but that's about it. When I read Collins's book, all of our aspiration should be to be a level 5 leader. Nobody even knows who you are, but yet your enterprise is eminently successful. And I think Collins is, he talks about Jack Welch, who was a big personality at GE, and then other companies where they're Fortune 500 companies, their returns to investors, their stock prices, their growth is enormous, and nobody knows what the name of the CEO is. But yet he, she, or they is facilitating the team growth, this wonderful growth in enterprise, this recognition. So I went from being maybe level 1, level 2. I would never brag and say I'm a level 5 leader, but my level stepped up.
That was the aspiration.
Yeah. I went to level 4 and realized, I can't drink the ocean. So I have to appoint vice chairs. I have to delegate. I have to listen more. You know, when you have a small division and you're in charge, make it go to your head, right? I'm in charge. I'm in charge. This is how it's going to be. That's not a good leadership style. And so, you know, faculty meetings, building consensus, asking for different opinions in roundtable forum with respect to colleagues, collective decision making when you can. I learned a lot, and by reading.
And you mentioned humility when we talked about your education, and again, the level five leader having that paradoxical humility and vision at the same time. So I want to go to a question from one of our participants. And this is a good transition to the role within the American College of Surgeons and the chair of the Regents. How has being involved in advocacy and the administration of the House of Surgery formed your perspectives?
Mo, repeat that. How?
Yes, how has being involved in advocacy and the administration of the House of Surgery
Oh,
formed your perspectives?
well, again, I come back to David Costin Savaston Jr., who was president of the college, and we were very influenced by his appreciation of the value of the American College of Surgeons. And
Mhm.
that stuck with me my whole career. And so, you know, I joined the North Carolina chapter. The very first paper I gave was on train trauma to the North Carolina American College of Surgeons chapter. I presented it as a resident. I'll never forget it. It's 1985 or 1986. And then as I went through, you know, I couldn't wait. When I finished my training, I became boarded to join the College of Surgeons. Why? As a tribute to Dr. Savaston, who mentored me. And
Mhm.
then when I went to the college and had the experience going to the college, it's bigger than any one specialty, right? It is the house of surgery and should function as such. And then I became involved with the advisory council. Then I became chair of the advisory council. I served as a governor for the Hand Society and so forth. And I got to see the workings of the college up close and personal and all of these other surgical disciplines that were there. And I felt at home, Mo. I felt like
Mhm.
even though I'm a specialist in two specialties, the college is, you know, the specialties are not, they're certainly valued, they're important. I think they're rising in terms of the importance they are for the college, but the power of the college, the foundation, the presence in Washington, the way that the chapters work together locally and regionally and nationally, the global reach of the college, Operation, you know, Giving Back and so forth. It's an incredible organization. So the question is, you know, why am I so pro about the College of Surgeons related to advocacy? We have 85,000 members.
Mhm.
Our
Mhm.
financial profile is formidable. You know, as you know, I served on the health advisory group meeting that takes place in Washington, the board of the health advisory group in our Washington office. I've been on Capitol Hill, and the efforts of the college are for all surgeons, you know, whether it's tort reform or stopping Medicare, Medicaid cuts. You know, a small society can't do that or they won't be listened to. But the College of Surgeons has a voice. And that's again what I embrace. That's the meaning of the college to me. It represents all of surgery.
And just on the topic of college, you were the chair of the Board of Regents 2020-21. What
Yeah.
did that mean for you? What was the highlight of that experience?
Well, those were difficult times during COVID. That was the time of George Floyd. You know, Ronnie Stewart did an admirable job trying to steer the discussion around gun violence and trauma related gun problems in the United States. There were some issues related to the Texas abortion laws, and there are a lot of things that came along that
Mhm.
were related to healthcare. One could argue maybe they were political, but yet they influenced all of them, right? Influenced how we delivered care. The Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion were stood up. in the college. Again, I'm not going to get into any politics tonight, but again, the college recognized a need, okay, to at least provide some platform for equity for all voices, and I think they've done a good job doing that. But when I became chair of the Board of Regents, I can tell you I was incredibly flattered because, as you know, the process is your peers ask you to do this. And again, one of the things about the regents, and I think it's very important, even though we have specialties, we have Committee on Cancer, Committee on Trauma, all the different advocacy groups, we leave our specialty badges at the door. And we go into the regents room and say, what's best for surgery? What's best for surgery? It's all of surgery, not just general surgery. It's all of surgery. And I think if I've done anything, I've brought an awareness that, you know, for example, to the listeners, 55% of the college membership, at least a couple of years ago, was, quote, general surgeons. Mo, I don't know what a general surgeon is these days, but 45% are specialists, the OBGYN people, the ophthalmologists, the orthopedic surgeons, the neurosurgeons, and so forth. And so getting some sort of homogenized balance of all these voices, I think, represents a good opportunity for the college going forward. And Dr. Sadawe is working on that, the House of Surgery. People talk about it a lot. We have work to do there, but the work's being done. And again, particularly in these times of, for example, NIH cutbacks, the cost of education and so forth, college is more important than ever. And it has to be inclusive, and it has to listen to the needs of the specialists, and with its prowess, its resources, its personnel, its knowledge, they have to give back. I'm working very closely now, for example, with the Orthopedic Trauma Association. Years ago, there was polarity, like, you know, the general surgeons were going to step up and start nailing femurs. And you remember that small controversy. Well, now, as far as I'm concerned, it's a huge opportunity. The OTA, the Orthopedic Academy, the Committee on Trauma, everybody's working together for, you know, common needs of patients and their regions and things like that. So I think there's a great opportunity for the college ahead. I'm very enthusiastic about it.
Thank you. Another question from one of our participants: how did you initially grow involvement and leadership in national and international societies? Were there particular mentors or advocates that helped drive that transition?
I think that's a great question. And, you know, some of the people that have been on Fireside Chats before, for the listeners can listen, same questions come up. Now, if you're asked to do a job, we are service oriented, right, Mo? We serve our patients, we serve our communities. And again, like I said, I feel blessed. So when somebody says, can you spend some extra time helping our specialty or helping the college? That's a joy. It's time, it's commitment. Time management is important. But how did I ascend to leadership positions? By saying yes, by being asked to do a task, completing the task, completing it on time, not asking for credit, but getting the work done, and getting that recognition. And you know this, the next time something comes around, let's ask Dr. Shabahang to do this, because he did such a great job in this area. Let's ask him to do more. And pretty soon, it's like a flywheel, according to Collins, you know, you keep moving.
Excellent. And would you recommend that to people?
Yeah. And I think that's how it's occurred. And you have to be humble, but direct. You have to state what you think. Leadership, as Colin Powell said, is not a popularity contest. So I said lots of things in the Regents room with respect, with humility, that may have been controversial. But, you know, I think you have to speak what's on your mind and tell the truth about things as you see it. And you may be an outlier, but at some point, people actually recognize, hey, this person may be providing a different perspective. That perspective is valuable. Let's listen, let's pay attention and regroup. And that's happened to me a number of times. And nobody's thrown me out of the room. Now, obviously, it's sometimes the opposite thing happens. All right, go ahead, Levin. You lead. You think you know so much.
So, when we were talking, you talked some about teaching leadership. You've mentioned, the kind of the reading of the books, the impact that had, and we talked a little bit about teaching leadership to residents. What are your thoughts? What have you done? What's your advice to educators of the
Yeah.
future regarding this issue?
Well, I think, here's the list of where do we lead? We lead ourselves, we lead our families, we lead in our communities, we lead in our places of worship if we want. We lead in the operating room as, the buck stops with us as surgeons every day. We may be leading a section. We may be leading a practice plan, private enterprise, academics, government, VA, wherever one's practicing, you're leading. And so when I came to Penn, Wharton School of Business is literally on campus. And Mike Useem, when I was a new chair, Mike has written lots of books about leadership. He's the McNulty Professor of Leadership at Wharton, started the leadership module at the business school. I got to know him. He gave us a lecture and we become very close friends. He actually put together a module for my orthopedic residents, several weekends, reading list, leadership scholars within the ranks of our residents as senior leaders. They get to learn in the classroom about leadership. They have assignments, they have dialogue. And so I can teach, Mo, I can teach you how to find the starting point for an intermedullary nail of the femur in a fractured femur. What's the anatomy? What's the approach? How to set the patient up? But we don't teach you in orthopedics necessarily how to lead. And so I've sprinkled that in with Wharton. It's a high point for my residents. It's not just something to put on the CV, but it's almost like the equivalent of a certificate program. And they get a lot out of it in terms of how do they behave, how do they work. Look, every intern or PGY1, if they make it through a program, becomes a chief resident, right? And what's the chief resident do? They're leaders. They have to lead their entourage around the hospital on rounds. They have to assign. They have to handle conflict. You know the drill. So why not formally study that, like we study ethics, like we study anatomy, like we go to M&M, and it's time invested. But to me, it's been very valuable. We also have under Cara Cipriano, our vice chair of education, an educational pathway to optimize education in our orthopedic residency at Penn. And I'm not promoting Penn, but I'm saying we have courses on educating the educators, right? Learning how to be an educator. The college has a course in Durham every year on, how to be a leader. And if we can sprinkle that into residency, first of all, you have to believe, and I'll challenge you, Mo, as my friend, care will be better, right? Care will be better. Having an inspection, learning about leadership. Leadership is not about you. The acronym TEAM, together everyone achieves more. There's no I in team. And yet you've seen probably in your career, and I have, chief resident, it's all about him or her or them, right? What about the students on the service? What about the junior faculty that needs help in the operating room and so forth? So learning, teaching leadership, teaching people how to be educated. It's no different than learning how to do lap colis or, robotic Whipples or whatever.
And as essential, as we put people in leadership roles. So you've, again, through this conversation, you've done a lot. And what was your what were your learnings and how to balance both the professional and family life, and also within the professional life, the clinical life, the research life, the leadership life? What were some of the key tenets that you held on to in balancing all of this?
Well, you learn a lot from failure. You learn a lot from failure. And I'll say it publicly, in terms of the work-life balance. Shortly after I became chief of plastic surgery, I went through a very difficult divorce. And I say this with a little bit of a smile. I had a mistress. Everybody on the call is going, "Oh my God, he had a mistress." My mistress was Duke Hospital. Okay. And I spent too much time on me, on patients, whatever it is. And there are no excuses for it. I'm not asking for any kind of sympathy, but that was a failure, a life failure. And I had to reinvent myself. I had to become a better parent, a better partner, and life's good now, Mo. But I went through a tough period where it's failure. And I think any place along the line that people fail in the research lab, communicating thoughts for education, where they have patients, where we fail our patients. As I told you, and the audience knows, I do microvascular surgery. It's all or none. You have a thrombosis, flap dies, flap dies. So I've learned to learn from failure. We try not to fail, but failure is healthy. Anybody in innovation and business will tell you that. Test the waters. If the great idea doesn't work, it's not a failure, it's learning. What did Edison say? I didn't fail 10,000 times. I just didn't get it right with a light bulb. There's some quote about Edison in that regard. But let me come back to your question. So I've learned a lot from failing, from making the wrong decisions. I haven't dwelled on them for a long time. I think continuing to work on self-learning, I say to myself not infrequently, what can I do better? Mo, I learned to be a better listener. When I had 6 or 7 people in a division talk at the scrub sink, whatever, but when you have 65 faculty and everyone brings you their problems, you better learn how to listen. And at the boardroom, it's the same thing. Don't talk a lot. If you have something to say that's important, fine, but be a good listener and be a good observer of people. And that's helped me a lot. That's helped me a lot. Failing and listening and continuing to work on myself. I get up in the morning, I say, what can I do better for my institution, for my department, for my fellows, and how can I improve? Okay, I'm still working on myself, I can tell you. And that's actually very rewarding.
That's wonderful. And I really appreciate you sharing some of the things that you perceive as maybe some of the shortcomings. So what's next for you? What's in the future? How do you design your future?
Well, I know it sounds funny to hear it, but I think about this more and more. But in some ways, I feel like I'm just getting started. My late nights in the ICU in 1982 as an intern taking care of heart patients, I remember like it was yesterday. I have I've been involved, as you may know, and some of the people on the call, in this area of transplantation called vascularized composite allotransplant. When I came to Penn, I started the hand transplant program here. We've done 5 successful transplants. We've had, a research mission that DOD funded and so forth. I've worked very closely with the Penn Transplant Institute here with Avi Shaked and Kim Olthoff and now Jim Markman. So I'm very involved in allotransplantation, transplant of hands and faces and other body parts, and have an interest in this from the basic science standpoint. Just spent a year and a half at the National Academy writing the book with people like Nancy Asher and the bioethicist Art Kaplan from NYU on the consensus for hand and face transplant. So, Mo, I have plenty to do. One of the things I've talked about with senior leaders throughout the college, not necessarily orthopedics or plastic surgeons, of when do we hang up the cleats? When do I walk away from the very complex surgery and cases that I do? And I think, and I actually heard Murray Brennan talk about this. If you don't set a date, you will drift. And quite honestly, many of our institutions, have, cognitive tests they give people that are old. I'm going to be 71 in a couple of weeks, but I want to go out on top, Mo. And I don't want, somebody to say, oh my gosh, did you see what Levin did in the OR yesterday? It's horrible. Who's going to talk to him? Who's going to ask him to stop doing these cases because it's not good? Well, I had to do that as a chair. I had senior surgeons that were well known, well respected. It wasn't easy, but what's our world about? It's serving all with skill and trust and fidelity. And if skills erode, that's the worst possible thing that we can have. So I've set some parameters. I have some young people that I've trained, young relative to me, who I'm very, very proud of at Penn, who will carry on some of the orthoplastic procedures that we've popularized here, and coming soon to a conclusion of my operative participation at the level that I'm doing it. I have no trouble going into the OR, helping, pointing out, assisting, being available for advice. But I think every surgeon, Mo, has a shelf life. And each person, he, she, or they, have to determine what that is. And while I'm at the top of my game, humbly stated, I now ask the residents, who are honest with me. They're always honest. What do you think? How did we do? What could we have done better in this surgery, and so forth? But I'm close, and I'll say it publicly tonight because it's the right thing to do. Now, granted, right? People can go into their 80s. Oh, Dr. Smith, he operated till he was almost 90. That's Dr. Smith. I don't think it's right for Scott Levin. But I know that the things I'm involved in, as I mentioned, hand transplant, we have several other candidates I'm going to see through. To be able to hand the baton off,
yes,
to those that you've trained, that those you have confidence in, that's the right way to do it. John Kennedy said in his 1961 presidential inaugural address, I'll use my Boston accent, people in Boston will forgive me, the torch will be passed to the next generation. And there's a next generation, just like we came up as, medical students in the training. And look, I'm talking to you tonight. I've had a blessed, phenomenal career. It is not over, but I think what I'm looking to do, and to answer your question, Mo, is to continue to have impact. And impact is what we do when we're in the operating room, when we're teaching the next generation, when we're trying to get new knowledge, when we're directing the future of a health system. What influence might we have based on the principles that we believe in? Mm-hmm. And so that, I'm wildly enthusiastic about my future, and will reinvent myself, as I've done a couple times in life, to look at the next chapter and be productive and impactful.
Scott, as I cannot thank you enough. It's been an honor having this conversation with you, and I specifically thank you for the genuineness and authenticity and everything that you said. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. Dr. Sachdeva, I hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Mo, and thanks so much, Scott, for the pearls of wisdom that you've shared with us this evening. Clearly, you have talked in great depth about leadership and the adversity that makes us humble and better leaders and better human beings. And that, for those of you who are interested in the leadership literature, I'm talking to the audience now, you'll recognize the words twice born. And that is what people talk about. It's been reported repeatedly in the Harvard Business Reviews that those are the best leaders, people who have had to deal with adversity. And they even talk about the fact that when you're recruiting someone, ask for when they failed and how they dealt with that failure. So I think that's such a powerful message that you've shared with us. You've also shared the pearls of being broad-based initially in one's training, and then narrowing in on your area of expertise and being the best of the best to do the best job for the patients and for society as a whole. And the critical importance of being a clinician first. We all were trained as clinicians, and we cannot forget that. And also at the other end of our careers, to know when it's the right time to walk away when you're on top of the game. Again, something that we all have to learn and we all have to deal with in our lives. You've emphasized the value of hard work and the importance of making the right decisions at the right time in one's career. Even if opportunities seem exciting, sometimes they're not the right opportunity for that time, and we need to just walk away. And clearly, these are the principles that have borne you in good stead. I'm sure the people who are listening have benefited so much as I have listening to you and being reminded of these principles. And clearly, that is really the core of your success. And as I have heard you this evening, it brought back memories of the years when we were together in the Regents room. And then, as chair of the Regents, how wonderfully you led the college to take it to the next level. So thanks for being with us this evening. Thank you again, Mo, for a marvelous job in moderating the session. Thanks to all the attendees who've spent the time being here with us. I'm sure there are many more who will access the recording. And even for those who have attended, please go back and listen to it again. It's amazing how each time we listen to these recordings, we pick up some new pearls and things that we have not picked up the first time. So thank you all for being here. It's been a lovely evening, and have a great night. And thanks again to the staff for organizing this and for the smooth running of this whole session. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank
Seth.
you.
Mo, thank you.
I appreciate it, Scott.